Wildfires burning across Arizona.
Southeastern Arizona is probably one of the hottest, driest places in our geographic area.
The monsoon en route. Will it bring relief?
Eventually we get enough moisture in to where humidity stays at higher levels, and then that does eventually help firefighting efforts.
Plus, a shooting near our nation's capital. This is Arizona Week. Hello and thanks for joining us. We're in Cochise County this week covering the Lizard Fire. We'll get to this story in just a moment, but first, a shooting near our nation's capital. Arizona Senator Jeff Flake was there when the shots rang out. We turn now to Arizona Public Media's Christopher Conover for more.
Arizona Senator Jeff Flake was standing along the first baseline when the shooting began at the Republican baseball practice.
This is, ironically, one of the events in Congress, one of the institutions in Congress that breeds bipartisanship. Of course, it's Republicans against Democrats, but we all get together before the game to promote it. We raise money together for these charities, and then we have a big after party with both parties engaged. And so it's one of the most bipartisan and frankly one of the few lasting institutions of bipartisanship in Congress.
Senator Flake came to Tucson following the 2011 shooting when Democrat Gabrielle Giffords was wounded. That event brought civility, and many question whether that can happen now.
Well, I think for a time we had it, and it was a nice respite. I hope that this lasts longer this time. It's been needed for a long time. It's unfortunate that something like this has to prompt it and make us think, about it.
The calls for civility are not limited to those in power, though Flake says it needs to start with elected officials. Southern Arizona Congresswoman Martha McSally, a Republican, also addressed reporters about the need for civility.
I've met some people in the last few weeks that have different politics within their marriage or within their family, and they're like hardly can talk to each other. Come on, America. We are Americans, and we need to be united. And the enemy is out there. The enemy is not in here.
3 Capitol Police officers were at practice as security for Representative Steve Scalise because he's the Republican whip in the House. That's the 3rd highest ranking member. If he hadn't been there, no officers would have been present. Most people say that would have led to more casualties. During a Facebook Live town hall on Thursday, Arizona Republican Senator John McCain said security is a tough question, adding he's never had a security guard, other than Secret Service protection, during his presidential run in 2008.
I think it's something we've got to sort out. I think the shock of these killings and wounding is just it's just something we're thinking, wow, at a congressional baseball game practice, really? So we're going to have to sort it out. I think we're going to have hearings in our Rules Committee, which set the parameters for people being able to come in and out of the Capitol, and I think at least it requires some hearings and some experts before the congressional committees to say, look, you're in danger or you're not in danger, or here's what some of the recommendations of what you might, action you might take. It can't be ignored.
Southern Arizona Congressman Raul Grijalva, a Democrat, said by phone he and his colleagues must remember that they should meet with their constituents.
Maybe I blithely go along pretending nothing will ever happen, but that's an attitude that I have to have. Otherwise, you're living in the shell, and in a representative government, you're not allowed to do that.
Some new security measures are already in place at the U.S. Capitol. More may be coming.
Back to wildfires now. There are nearly 30 burning throughout Arizona this week. Many of them considered Type 1 incidents, emergency situations. Arizona is leading the way in communicating with the public, especially the deaf community. Here's Cameo Hunsaker, an interpreter, and you'll be seeing a lot of her throughout this broadcast.
So I am a nationally certified sign language interpreter. Normally I freelance, I'm an independent contractor, but here we are sent on this fire by the Arizona Commission for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing, who started a program called the Emergency response credentialing program for interpreters so that interpreters could be available at any Type 1 incidents all over the state. There is a need for sign language interpretation to be provided, especially with news broadcasts during an emergency. It's a common misconception that closed captioning provides access to all deaf people. For many deaf people, sign language, American Sign Language, is their first language, not English. And so there can be a language barrier. Closed captioning isn't always completely accurate either. Closed captioning is a wonderful service. It works great for our hard of hearing communities and the deaf population that has a stronger command of the English language. Unfortunately, that is a smaller percentage of the deaf population, and a lot of deaf people do struggle with written English. So in order for all of our message to be accessed equally by the deaf population, we really need to have interpreters on the news and other media broadcasts using their natural language, their A language, which is American Sign Language. So just like hearing people, deaf people, their education levels run the gamut, just like the hearing population. One thing that many people have a misconception about is that English and American Sign Language are not the same. American Sign Language has a completely different syntax and a completely different structure. And for many deaf people, American Sign Language is their first language and English is their second language. Teaching deaf kids in school English literacy has been a challenge for 200 years. So English is a challenge for quite a few deaf people. And when we want to make sure that we provide equal access to this information, especially during an emergency, what that means is providing the information to the deaf community in their natural language, their A language, which is sign language. The Americans with Disabilities Act has actually been around for 25 years. However, the requirements for the deaf population tend to be a little vague. Closed captioning was previously thought of as being a way to provide equal access, and unfortunately for the deaf community, it just lacks in access. So during these emergency situations, we want to make sure that the deaf population of Arizona has up-to-the-minute, accurate information, just like the hearing population does. This is a brand new program. It just started in the last year, although I know people at Arizona Commission for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing have been ramping this up for quite some time. The first cohort of interpreters was just trained within the past year, and this is our very first fire season. What we're hoping is that this becomes much more commonplace at all of the wildfires across the state, as well as any other emergency response incidents. And hopefully other states will look at Arizona as a model in this, because as far as we know, we're the only state to have this robust of a program to provide access in emergency situations. So we are really the leader. This is a cutting-edge program that Arizona has provided for its residents.
This is the Lizard Fire. Lightning sparked it back on June 7th. It's burned for more than a week, charring more than 15,000 acres. More than 600 men and women from 7 states involved in the firefight. Here's Incident Commander John Pierson. John, thanks for having us out here to Wilcox High School. Why is Wilcox considered the base camp for the Lizard Fire?
You know, logistically, it was the right place for us to come and set up an incident command post, because the agencies that we're working for, you know, they wanted us to be able to engage really quickly. And so in order for us to do that, we utilize facilities like this, where it's a kind of a keystone operation where you just can open the door and start doing business logistically and administratively, and supporting the operational folks out on the fire.
How far are we from the fire line here?
You know, it's about 18 miles or 18-minute drive to where we initially started working on this fire, you know, which was over by Dragoon, the community of Dragoon, and then most of the activity on the east side of the Dragoon Mountain. So this was the appropriate place for us to support that operation.
This has been considered the largest wildfire in Arizona this week. What is so unique about it?
You know, it's southeastern Arizona is probably one of the hottest, driest places in our geographic area, between New Mexico and Arizona. So, you know, the fuel conditions down here are very receptive to large fire growth. So that's, you know, primarily why we're here.
Can you describe some of the terrain that we're seeing in this particular area?
You know, it's typically the southeastern Sky Islands, desert shrub type, very flashy fuels, which creates very high rates of spread. Due to the temperatures and the relative humidities have been relatively conducive to fire behavior. That's what that's all about.
This fire has burned for more than a week now. What is it about it that's so hard to contain it?
It's burning in really steep, rugged country, and of course we don't want to engage our operational people in places where we can't be successful. More so to the fact we don't want to put people where we can't get them out if they were to get injured or hurt or seriously injured. We need to be operating in an area where we have a high probability of success of containing the fire. So primarily that's down in the lowlands where it's more flatter terrain, and we can utilize multiple operational assets, being heavy helicopters or hotshot crews, engines, dozers, where it's more conducive to be more efficient and effective.
Tell me about the people fighting these flames, because you have people representing more than at least 7 states.
Yeah, 7 states, and probably, so we're looking at the multiple resources from heavy helicopters to medium helicopters to light helicopters. In addition, we had, a few days ago, we had the very large air tanker, the DC-10, and then we had the large air tankers, and then combining that with the ground resources of dozers, engines, hotshot crews, and Type 2 IE incident crews, and multiple overhead resources.
For you as an incident commander, a lot of the times there's something about a fire that makes it unique or memorable. What is it about this one?
I think what's unique about this is that, we're dealing with multiple jurisdictions, Arizona State Forestry, private lands, Cochise County, the Coronado National Forest, and just the relationships that are built or have been built previous to us coming here and us maintaining those. It's been a very collaborative process for us, very easy transition. It just makes things work more smoothly. And lastly, I'd like to, recognize the Pierce Cochise Fire District. Those folks have done an outstanding job. We're winding down. The fire's in relatively good shape. The containment as of last night was about 64%. We're at about 15,000 acres. The priority areas for us are on the southern perimeter around the Cochise stronghold. We have crews inserted there, and by the end of the shift, we feel pretty good about where we're going to be at by the end of shift. We are conducting suppression rehab on those areas where we've disturbed the landscape with dozers or other apparatuses, and so we are focusing on that. We'll be releasing resources to be committed to other incidents within Arizona and the rest of the country, and scaling down.
Slurry drops from aircraft are key in firefights like this one because of the rugged terrain. Mark Pater now with more on air attack operations for the Lizard Fire.
On the Lizard Fire, I'm one of 2 air operations branch directors, and we help coordinate all the aviation resources, the aircraft, and the missions that those aircraft perform every day in coordination with the people on the ground.
We talk aircraft. What have you been utilizing out on this fire?
We have a variety of different types of aircraft. First, we have a fire traffic area established over the fire where only fire aircraft can fly within. It's an 8 nautical mile radius cylinder, if you want to visualize that. We have an air attack that flies high above the fire and directs the aircraft, like very large air tankers, helicopters. When they come in to drop retardant or water, the air attack directs them as to where they need the water or retardant dropped.
How many helicopters, planes have you had up in the air? How much water are we talking?
Well, it depends. With the very large air tanker, I believe they used that aircraft early on in the fire. And that aircraft can drop about 12,000 gallons of retardant at a time. Then we have large air tankers that run about 2,000 to 3,000 gallons of retardant. Then the helicopters, the large helicopters, will drop primarily water on this fire, anywhere from 1,000 to 2,000 gallons of water at a time. Then the medium helicopters will follow in, and they'll drop between 300, maybe 400 gallons of water, depending on how hot and how high they have to fly.
Is there a water resource out here for you that you've
That's been a challenge. We had a hard time, but luckily some of the local agricultural producers, farmers, one in particular over on the east side, provided his well, and we were able to fill a 10,000-gallon pumpkin, which is a large container to hold water, and a smaller one for the smaller helicopters and water tenders. So, and on the other side, of course, there's the river, but there's a landowner that has some ponds over there, and we have an agreement with that person to use our large and medium helicopters to draw water out of those ponds.
For a lot of the locals down here, people saw the DC-10, some great pictures of that. That was exciting. It also meant you were pulling out the big guns. Was that important for this fight?
I would say yes. Early on, this fire was moving very rapidly. And when that fire came down off the slopes and into the flats, we saw fire behavior that was a little more out of what we're used to seeing for this time of year. And the very large air tank can come in and drop not just one load of 12,000 gallons, but break that load up into a series of drops, and then more strategically place the retardant on the ground to try to slow the spread of the fire. But the important part of that too is you can drop all the retardant you want, but until you have people on the ground to actually back up that retardant, fire can burn through that retardant as it dries out.
How powerful is that retardant? Can you kind of describe what its use is, what it looks like, what it feels like?
It's a red, it's very slick. You don't want to be standing there when they're dropping retardant. It can pick up rocks. It'll dig a small trench in the ground. I've seen it take trees out of the ground, small trees. So generally, actually always, we tell our firefighters to clear the drop zone. They have to be out of the area before the aircraft can drop the retardant on the ground. And the same thing with the water buckets. It doesn't matter if it's 2,000 gallons of water or 200, you do not want to be standing underneath that.
The air attack has been a very significant part of this firefight, getting it under control. Without it, how would fires change these days?
We wouldn't be flying any aircraft because the air attack is the person that coordinates the dance. They make sure that the aircraft coming in don't get too congested, that our fire traffic area stays clear, and they talk directly to the people on the ground in the various divisions and see what their needs are. Do they need helicopters? Do they need air tankers? And then they'll help them make the proper decisions and direct the aircraft into where it's truly needed. Another issue is that we've seen over the last 2 years is the use of drones. And because we do have a fire traffic area in effect, that fire traffic area is restricted only to firefighting aircraft. If a drone were to fly into that fire traffic area, they're technically breaking the law. And we have to shut down all of our aviation operations, air attack, everybody goes away until we can assure everyone that that drone isn't back in the fire traffic area.
The conversation, I think, goes away from the safety of this type of work, but flying over a fire is very dangerous.
Yes, it is. I'd say one thing, the way the winds behave over the fire. We had strong winds early on with this incident, and the winds coming over that mountain out of the west will eddy up high, and aircraft will get bounced around quite a bit. The air attacks may not feel that eddying effect so much, but they'll feel those strong winds coming out of the west or southwest. But the helicopters flying in at a lower altitude, they have to deal with that. And so safety-wise, we have wind limits that the aircraft have to abide by. They can fly under certain wind limits, but when the winds get above a certain speed or knots, then we have to shut them down and wait. We saw that on the sawmill fire. There was a full day where we could not fly aircraft because it was just too windy. And not only is it dangerous for the pilots and the aircraft, but the retardant isn't effective either.
Thank you so much, Mark. Wildfires have charred more than 80 square miles in Arizona this week. Here's a look at a map with some of the fires burning statewide. You can see the firefight happening in various parts of Arizona. From the north to the south, the east to the west, it seems fires starting nearly daily. These photos taken from throughout the state. Crews from all over the country in Arizona, an effort on the ground and in the air. According to the Forest Service, the state is considered to always be in fire season. Wildfires started earlier than normal this year. In late April, the Sawmill Fire southeast of Tucson consumed 47,000 acres and cost more than $7 million to fight. And the weather plays a role in the firefight. Meteorologists keeping a close eye on what's referred to as the Haines Index, which measures the high heat and low humidity. The National Interagency Fire Center says the state's potential for fire is high. Here's meteorologist John Bonk.
I'm here to provide first and foremost for the safety of the firefighters. The weather impacts fire in a pretty dramatic way. The main things that I'm looking out for are humidity and wind. The impacts of humidity and wind are the primary drivers of fire spread. So I'm looking out for events that could cause rapid rates of spread or what we consider very dramatic fire growth.
Anything unique about what you've seen in weather patterns down here in southern Arizona this week?
The winds have been a little bit of a challenge to begin with, especially with the terrain, how you have your broad areas of flat and then the mountains kind of poking up through the middle. The winds that are hitting one side of the mountain may not necessarily affect the other side of the mountain in the same way. They may be stronger, they may be weaker, they may be coming from completely different directions. So having those mountains act as a little barrier to the wind flow is certainly a challenge.
How important are you in this firefight? It sounds like you're just as critical as the boots on the ground.
They consider me to be very important. I like to stay pretty humble about it, especially as Mother Nature likes to throw wrinkles our way. So again, I'm here for the firefighter safety, and that's my goal, is to make sure that they're not surprised by any weather event.
I know you come to us from Portland, Oregon, yes. But here in Arizona we have the monsoon, which technically launches this week. Does that complicate things? Does it excite you at all?
Well, you can't say that the monsoon technically launches. It commonly would start around this time of year. However, the season's been different, and we're still looking at least at maybe a week or two, if not longer, before we get the true monsoon. There are going to be some thunderstorms in the area early next week. However, these are going to be just more formed by really hot air, and so we're not seeing the heavy rains that we'd normally get with a monsoon.
Can you describe how powerful lightning can be when it makes that strike on dry ground?
It's pretty impressive. To give an idea, some scientists have estimated that the temperature of the lightning is over 50,000 degrees, which is considered to be hotter than the surface of the sun. The main impact is to just immediately ignite whatever it strikes. And so when that happens, if your fuels are dry enough, if it's really dry like it is right now, then any lightning strike can start any fire, and it's really best for people to provide protection around their homes to give the firefighters a chance to defend them.
Anything about Arizona's dry weather pattern that makes you concerned as a meteorologist who watches out for firefighter safety?
It's going to be hot and dry, and conditions are such that if somebody puts a spark on the ground, somebody puts fire on the ground, there's going to be wind every day. And with all the grasses that you have around, especially if you've had a wet winter, which has not really been the case the last few months, you can get pretty rapid fire spread because the wind can really push the fire through that grass.
This is an important week for Arizona. The dry conditions, the climbing temperatures, and we head into the monsoon, which brings thunderstorms. Here's Ken Drozd from the National Weather Service in Tucson.
The monsoon usually kind of takes hold in the latter part of June, last week in June, or the first week in July. That's when we get the moisture here. Of course, the monsoon officially begins the season on June 15th, and we start seeing the early indications of that trend toward bringing that moisture up into our area.
We have seen some moisture already, especially in southeastern Arizona. Is that unusual?
Not at all. We tend to get little bursts of moisture as we're transitioning from the June pattern into the July pattern, which is much wetter. So we may have a day or two where we get moisture up here, which at this time of year is usually not very deep. So it results in some thunderstorms, not necessarily a lot of rainfall, but a lot of lightning strikes. And this year with the fuel conditions that we had present, a lot of taller dry grass and other dry fuels, we had those lightning starts that started all these wildfires.
If we can remind people about the monsoon, because there is a lot of confusion surrounding it. It's not just rainstorms, it involves a whole pattern or system.
Right, it's an actual season that takes hold just as in the Northern Hemisphere, as the whole atmospheric patterns change in the Northern Hemisphere. The jet stream retreats northward, farther into Canada, and high pressure builds over us, bringing us usually a period of extreme heat before that kind of shifts northward and allows our prevailing flow to be more easterly or southeasterly.
Okay. I read recently there was a new report that came out from some climate study that said that we're about to see wetter and then drier conditions. What does that really mean for the remainder of the next, I think, next 10 years, maybe next 20 years?
We've had several fairly decent monsoon seasons here the last 2 or 3 years. And so, I mean, every season is different. We would expect eventually to kind of even out where we have some wetter and some drier. So we're going to see a fluctuation from season to season, certainly.
Is there a change that's happening just overall with the climate, the shift, global warming? I mean, where is that discussion right now?
Well, we've seen certainly some warmer temperatures, particularly nighttime lows, but also some higher temperatures or a longer period of higher temperatures. I think the results of that are a little bit up in the air as far as, we've seen the last few years, even though we've had some higher temperatures, we've also had then more moisture come up here, and we've had a little bit more rain than normal, although we're still talking about small amounts. We are in the Southwest, so those totals are not terribly large.
What are the totals on average here in Arizona? I know it depends on what geographic area you're at.
Right. Yeah, the Tucson area, you're kind of looking around the 5 to 6 inches during the monsoon, which accounts for about half of what you get during the whole year. Of course, as you go a little bit farther west and north, the amounts go down. They're lower. Of course, the mountains then tend to get a lot more than that as well, 2 to 3 times as much during the monsoon.
Okay. One of the hats you wear at the National Weather Service is weather preparedness. What do people need to know as far as launching into the summer season here where we have more rainfall?
Well, first of all, the heat is very, very important and can be very deadly. We want people to take heed when it's very hot outside. Try to conduct their activities as early in the morning as possible, and stay out of the heat of the day if possible, obviously. And then as we get into thunderstorms, lightning is a very big hazard here in southern Arizona. We get a lot of lightning strikes during the monsoon time of year. And so if you can hear thunder, that means lightning is close enough to strike your position. So we say when thunder roars, go indoors.
Okay. Regarding the lightning and the wildfires, does the monsoon help? Does it hurt? Does it hamper efforts when it comes to what we're seeing, especially right now in the state?
Right. It does kind of a little bit of both. As we get closer to the monsoon, again, we may have some more moisture come in here, but maybe not great amounts of moisture, but enough to possibly spark more thunderstorms, which could exacerbate fire conditions, also produce some strong gusty winds that would really endanger firefighters as well. Eventually, we get enough moisture in to where humidity stays at higher levels, and then that does eventually help firefighting efforts.
Before we go, a weather phenomenon to share with you. A photo taken last week near the town of Hereford. That's just outside of Sierra Vista. A landspout tornado. The National Weather Service says the cause is a dust devil drawn toward the cloud base by a thunderstorm updraft, which then formed a connection from the ground to a cloud. The National Weather Service says this is a first for the season. For all of us at Arizona Public Media, I'm Lorraine Rivera. Thanks for joining us.